One last brief little area to cover with respect to reward and food consumption is the effect of cannabinoids on appetite. Now, you're probably well aware that when people consume cannabinoids through smoking marijuana or ingesting marijuana, for instance, it has a strong appetite effect. Okay. That said, we also have endogenous cannabinoids that are found naturally in our body, and there's receptors for these cannabinoids all over the body, but a lot are localized in the brain in particular. And cannabinoids binding to the receptors, particularly certain types of receptors in the brain, we know can promote higher levels of feeding. Okay. So CB2 receptors are not what we're talking about. Those are the getting high ones. CB1 cannabinoid receptors, these are the ones that are involved with feeding behavior. So for instance, if I give CB1 antagonists, okay, we see a decrease in overeating. Okay. If we conversely give agonists to the CB1 receptors, and those are administered through the ventromedial hypothalamus or the NA, nucleus accumbens, we see strong overeating that's promoting through that CB1 agonism. Okay. And again, it's important to note that these things are never working in isolation, and cannabinoids have an effect both on homeostatic appetite. They can modulate our desire to eat via what were internal sensing mechanisms, and they also have modulation on the reward pathway, which is what I'll focus on the next slide. Okay, it's important to note that this is a proposed mechanism. So we're not fully sure, like I said, how cannabinoids promote overconsumption, but one of the main proposed mechanisms is through modulating dopamine, basically. Okay, and we know that if there is higher dopamine, we're going to see more wanting. Okay, so normally when we have our dopamine neuron here, we have the dopamine cell body, and we have receptors on these dopamine neurons that, for one thing, can sense, have GABA that binds to them through GABA releasing neurons. Okay, think GABA, think inhibition. Okay, so these GABA neurons, they can inhibit dopamine. Okay, however, cannabinoids can bind to receptors on these GABA releasing neurons and inhibit GABA release. So we have an inhibition. So this is inhibition. GABA inhibits dopamine. If I have an inhibition of inhibition, that means that these fire. Okay, so this is, like I said, one of the proposed mechanisms by which cannabinoids impact appetite by stimulating those dopaminergic neurons to release dopamine and promote food-seeking behavior, but not necessarily food-liking behavior. Okay, so that's a proposed mechanism, but I just wanted to throw cannabinoids in here because I didn't want you to think that it's only dopamine. And really, there's various neurotransmitters in various areas of the brain that are involved in non-homeostatic appetite as well as homeostatic appetite. Okay, so food intake and reward systems. So what? We have established that food intake is mediated by both homeostatic and hedonic or non-homeostatic pathways. Check. In obesity, hedonic, non-homeostatic pathways may dominate, promoting strong wanting for food, even in the absence of liking it. Okay? So how does this help us prevent, manage, or treat obesity? That's the question. How do we help people maybe have less of this food-seeking behavior? And quite honestly, we don't have all of the answers here. Okay? I have definitely a very spiritual side, and I would argue, when it comes to wanting, that's when science and spirituality really meet up. Because in spirituality, one of the main concepts, especially like Buddhism associates spirituality, it's all about not wanting for things, and it's about being present with this present moment. And if we can help people be present with this present moment and accept the things that are going on in their body and be open to things that are going on in their body instead of wanting for something that's not here, that can potentially be a mechanism to help with eating. Another potential mechanism is more mindful eating, because remember that if we eat mindfully, we're more aware, our hippocampus is more aware of what we're eating, and can help compare that to our memories of what's appropriate or not. Also, and like this talks about it in this last slide, we also can work on controlling the environment, because environmental stimuli can activate that desire, that seeking out of food, that wanting of food. Okay, so those are all potential mechanisms that we can work with the reward pathway. Okay, potentially also changing our diet, so if there's less foods that we're consuming that are naturally rewarding, like less of this Western style diet and more of like a whole foods based or Mediterranean style diet, might help improve or lessen that reward activated feeding behavior. Okay, so like it says here, to put this all together, homeostatic appetite should ideally be keeping us in energy balanced, but it can be comprised epigenetically or regularly genetically. There can be resistance, and like we said, it can be overridden by this non-homeostatic hedonic appetite. Okay, hedonic appetite associated with hippocampal dysfunction as well as hippocampal dysfunction as well as prefrontal cortex dysfunction. Is also driven by this reward pathway. It seems to be primarily mediated by dopamine and the endocannabinoid system, but in particular dopamine, which promotes the wanting of food, not necessarily the liking of food. Okay? We can rewire our brains. It's important to realize that there is neuroplasticity in this. We can learn different things, okay, but that takes time, okay, and there's only so much we can rewire our brains, okay, although we can rewire them decently. Okay, we can shuffle our microbiome, which also affects appetite, but there's only so much we can do that as well. And of course, we can't change genetics. So like it says here, one of our best approaches is to kind of change some of the stimuli, external stimuli, that can provoke this reward-seeking behavior. And I'm also a big fan of teaching people to, be okay with the present moment. Be okay with the signals that are coming up and what they're trying to tell us. Because sometimes individuals are seeking rewards, they're wanting something else to kind of avoid feeling what they're feeling right now. And what they're feeling right now, could be influenced by a lot of past things. Trauma can influence that as well. Some negative feelings they have about their current situation or their past. That can all bring things up that make people want to seek out a different kind of feeling. So I am a huge advocate of promoting really emotional health that can help to potentially reduce some of this reward-seeking behavior, to find the rewards within ourselves instead of finding the rewards outside of ourselves. Okay, so a little mixture of science and spirituality there. You're only responsible for the science part, okay? So that is the non-homeostatic appetite unit, and I'm excited to talk about this in class with you guys as well.